There's a moment in every investigation where everything still looks normal until it doesn't. A woman pulls into a gas station, hands her children to their father, exchange a few quiet words. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming. But minutes later, at the very first red light, she accelerates, cuts past him, and disappears. That woman was Alexis Disha Wear. And what happened after that moment still hasn't been explained. Before anything went wrong, before the fear, the questions, the silence, Alexis Disha Wear was building something real, not just a business. A life that had direction, momentum, intention. She was born and raised in South Carolina, in a family that wasn't just close in distance, but close in spirit. The kind of family where people show up for each other, where gatherings are loud, conversations overlap, and laughter carries through the house long after the music stops. Growing up between Anderson and Greenville counties, Alexis wasn't the quiet one in the corner. She was the energy, the one who could walk into a room and shift it without even trying. Not because she demanded attention, but because she naturally drew it. People noticed her confidence first. She didn't shrink herself to make others comfortable. She spoke directly, laughed loudly, dressed in intention, carried herself like someone who knew exactly who she was, even when life around her wasn't perfect. And that kind of presence does something to people. It makes them feel seen. It makes them feel included. Her family remembers that about her, how she could take an ordinary moment and make it feel alive, turning quiet gatherings into something memorable, checking in on people without being asked, standing up when something didn't feel right, especially when it came to her family. Because Alexis wasn't just expressive, she was protective. If someone she loved was in trouble, she didn't hesitate. She stepped in, spoke up, made it clear where she stood. There was a loyalty to her that people leaned on, the kind you don't question. But even that, her personality, her presence, her strength, wasn't the most important part of who she was. The people closest to her will tell you that immediately, because above everything else, she was a mother, and not just in title, but in action. Her daughter, Naomi, came first, from the way she dressed her, to the way she spoke about her, to the way she protected her space and her peace. There was intention in everything. Naomi wasn't just her child. She was her pride, her reflection, her responsibility. Then came her son, Trayval, younger, still growing into the world. And Alexis adjusted to that too, balancing both children in a way that made it clear. They weren't part of her life. They were her life. People noticed it in the smallest ways. If Alexis showed up somewhere, her kids were either with her or being talked about. If she dressed up, her kids were just as put together. If she was planning something, her kids were included in it. There was no separation between who she was as a woman and who she was as a mother. It was one identity. And that matters more than anything when you look at what happened next. Because in missing person cases, there's always a question investigators and families come back to. What is this person capable of? Would they leave on their own? Would they disappear intentionally? Would they walk away from everything they built? But with Alexis, the people who knew her best don't hesitate. They don't second guess. They don't debate. They say it plainly. She would not leave her children, not without a word, not without a plan, not without making sure they were safe. That wasn't who she was. And that understanding doesn't just shape how her family grieves. It shapes how this entire case is viewed. Because when someone disappears, it's easy to get lost in timelines, locations, and theories. But the truth often starts somewhere simpler, with the person themselves, who they were, what they valued, what they would never do. And in the case of Alexis Disha Wear, that foundation is clear. She was building a life. She was raising her children. And she was not the kind of woman who would walk away from either. At 29, Alexis Disha Wear wasn't waiting for an opportunity to find her. She had already figured something out that a lot of people don't realize until much later. If you want a different life, you don't wait for it. You build it. And that's exactly what she was doing. From the outside, it might have looked simple, A young woman running a hair business out of her apartment in Greenville. But if you look closer, there was nothing small about what she had created. Because Alexis wasn't just doing hair. She was building a reputation. Clients didn't come to her just because she was available. They came because she was in demand. Women were traveling from outside the city, sometimes from places like Atlanta or Charlotte, just to sit in her chair. And in a field as competitive as beauty and styling, that doesn't happen by accident. That happens when people trust your work, when they believe in your results, when your name starts moving through conversations without you even being in the room. And what made Alexis different wasn't just technical skill, it was how she made people feel. There's a difference between someone who provides a service and someone who creates an experience. With Alexis, it was the experience. You weren't just getting your hair done. You were stepping into her space, her energy. She talked with her clients, laughed with them, listened, encouraged, made them feel seen. By the time they left, it wasn't just about how they looked. It was about how they felt walking out the door. Confidence, put it together, ready, and that kind of impact builds loyalty. The kind of loyalty that turns clients into regulars and regulars into advocates. But what really set Alexis apart was this. She understood branding. Before it became something everyone talked about, she was already doing it. She paid attention to how she presented herself, her style, her image, her presence online. Under the name Lex Goddess, she built a growing social media audience. Thousands of followers watching not just what she did, but how she lived. And she used that platform intentionally, not just for attention, but for expansion. She showcased her work, promoted her services, connected her personality to her business. She wasn't separating her brand from herself. She was becoming the brand. And from there, the vision started to grow. Hair was just a foundation. She began stepping into makeup, fashion, styling, content creation, each move building on the last, each piece connecting to something bigger. Because behind everything she was doing day to day, there was a long-term plan taking shape. Atlanta, not as a dream, as a destination. And more importantly, as a next step. This is where it becomes clear that Alexis wasn't just thinking about growth. She was actively preparing for it. She had already taken steps to relocate, looked into breaking her lease early, invested money into inventory, clothing, racks, supplies, started building the structure for a combined business space, a salon, and a boutique, under one vision. That kind of move requires more than ambition. It requires commitment, planning, risk, because relocating to a new city, especially one like Atlanta, means starting over in many ways. New market, new competition, new environment. But Alexis wasn't approaching it blindly. She was bringing something with her, a skill set, a client base, a growing brand, and most importantly, confidence in her ability to make it work. She even encouraged her brother to come with her, not just to move, but to build together. That tells you everything about her mindset. She wasn't thinking small. She wasn't just trying to maintain what she had. She was trying to multiply it. And when you look at her life during this period, that's what stands out. Momentum. Everything was moving forward. Her business was growing. Her audience was expanding. Her plans were becoming real. And that's what makes what happened next so difficult to process. Because Alexis wasn't stuck. She wasn't lost. She wasn't disappearing from something. She was moving towards something. A bigger life. A new city. More opportunities. More stability for her children. And when someone is in that kind of forward motion, it changes how you interpret everything that follows. Because people who are building something don't just walk away from it. Especially not when everything they've worked for is finally starting to come together. Up to this point, everything in Alexis Disha Wear's life had a clear direction. She was building, planning, moving forward. And then something shifted, not dramatically, not in a way that immediately set off alarms, but enough that the people closest to her began to notice. Something wasn't right. It started in small ways. Conversations that felt different. Moments where her tone changed. a kind of tension that didn't match the person they knew, because Alexis wasn't typically someone who moved through life in fear. She was direct, assertive, grounded. So when that energy began to change, it stood out. At first, it might have been easy to misread, to assume she was just dealing with stress. She had a lot going on, running a business, preparing to relocate, raising 2 children, navigating personal challenges. Anyone would feel pressure under that weight. But this didn't sound like pressure. It didn't sound like someone overwhelmed by responsibility. It sounded like someone who felt watched, targeted, unsafe. She told her mother that someone had been following her, not once, not vaguely, but consistently. A black truck, showing up repeatedly, in different places, at different times. And the way she described it, it didn't feel like a coincidence to her. It felt intentional. That's an important distinction, because there's a difference between noticing something unusual and believing something is happening to you. Alexis believed it, and that belief shaped how she moved, how she spoke, and how she responded to her surroundings. Now here's where the situation becomes more complex, and where careful, responsible storytelling matters. When her mother asked a simple question, "Who is it?" Alexis didn't give a name. She didn't point to a specific person. Instead, she used a word that carried weight. She said, "The devil." And depending on how you hear that, it can be interpreted in different ways. Some might hear that and immediately dismiss it. Assume confusion. Assume exaggeration. Assume something wasn't grounded. Others might hear it as symbolic language, a way of expressing that whatever or whoever she believed was after her, it felt overwhelming, dangerous, evil even. But what matters here isn't choosing one interpretation over another. What matters is understanding the core truth. Alexis felt like she was in danger, and she communicated that, more than once, to people she trusted. Her mother didn't describe it as casual. She described it as serious, as something that made her pause. Because when someone you know, someone strong, someone grounded, starts speaking from a place of fear, you notice. But like so many situations in real life, it didn't come with clear evidence. No confirmed identity. No direct confrontation. No obvious explanation. Just a pattern. A feeling. A repeated claim that something wasn't right. And that's where things often get missed. Because without something concrete, it's easy to hesitate, to question, to wonder if it's something that will pass. But looking back now, through the lens of everything that followed, those moments carry more weight because they weren't isolated. They were building, layer by layer, and they tell us something important about Alexis's state of mind in the days leading up to her disappearance. She wasn't relaxed. She wasn't at ease. She was alert, watching, trying to make sense of something she couldn't fully explain, but couldn't ignore it either. And when someone is living in that kind of tension, it changes how they react, how they make decisions, how quickly they move when something feels wrong. So when we look ahead to what happened next, to the sudden choices, the urgency, the unpredictability, it doesn't come out of nowhere. It connects back to this moment, this shift, where something in Alexis's world stopped feeling safe. And she knew it, even if she couldn't fully prove it. By the time we reach this point in the timeline, the story of Alexis Disha Wear begins to shift from who she was to what she was navigating. Because alongside the growth, the plans, the momentum, there were pressures building underneath. And these aren't guesses. They're documented. In the days leading up to her disappearance, Alexis wasn't just thinking about change. She was actively making it happen. One of the clearest indicators of that is this. She had recently taken steps to leave a relationship. Now, in many cases, that might sound routine. People separate. People move on. But in this situation, the details matter. Because Alexis didn't just walk away quietly. She created a record. She communicated concerns about her safety. She documented conflict. She described behavior that made her feel uncomfortable, controlled, and at times, unsafe. And that distinction is important. Because documentation changes everything. It tells us that this wasn't a fleeting argument. It wasn't a temporary disagreement. It was serious enough for her to put it in writing, to create a trail, to make sure that what she was experiencing existed beyond just memory. That kind of action is intentional. It shows awareness. It shows that she understood something needed to change, and that she was taking steps to protect herself in the process. At the same time, she was preparing to relocate, breaking a lease early, organizing her next move, planning a transition out of her current environment. When you look at these pieces together, they form a pattern, not of someone who is lost or uncertain, but of someone who is actively trying to exit a situation. And that brings us to something investigators and experts consistently point out in cases like this. There is often a period of increased risk when someone is preparing to leave a difficult or unstable situation, not because leaving is wrong, but because leaving disrupts whatever dynamic was in place. It changes access. It changes control. It changes expectations. And that shift can create tension. That's not speculation. It's a pattern observed across many documented cases. Now, it's important to be clear here. Recognizing that pattern doesn't mean assigning blame. It doesn't mean drawing conclusions about any specific individual. It simply means understanding the environment Alexis was navigating at the time. She was building a new life, preparing to relocate, documenting concerns, and separating herself from something she no longer wanted to be part of. That's a lot of change in a short period of time. And change, especially layered change, can create instability. Emotionally, logistically, even socially. It can affect how people around you respond. It can affect how you move through your day. And it can heighten your awareness of risk. When you combine that with what we already know, her expressed fear, her belief that she was being followed, her urgency in certain moments, a clearer picture starts to form. Not a conclusion, but a context. Alexis wasn't just living her normal routine. She was in transition, actively trying to move forward, while something behind her still felt unresolved. And that matters, because when we later look at the decisions she made, the sudden movements, the urgency, the choices that didn't follow a predictable pattern, they don't exist in isolation. They exist within this window. A window where she was trying to change her life, while also feeling like something wasn't right around her. And in investigations like this, understanding that window isn't optional. It's essential because it helps answer a deeper question. Not just what happened to Alexis, but what was happening in her life right before everything changed. January 28th. By the time Alexis Disha Wear pulls up to her mother's home, the pace of everything finally slows down. No clients and planning.no movement. Just family. She brings her children with her, something she often did. That alone doesn't stand out. It feels routine, familiar, safe, and at first, nothing about that visit seems out of place. She eats, spends time with her kids, go inside, but then something subtle begins to show. Not in what she says, but in how she is. She's tired. Not the kind of tired that comes from a long workday, but something heavier. The kind that sits behind your eyes. The kind that doesn't go away with rest. She goes to sleep earlier than usual, withdraws at moments. There are gaps in her energy, periods where she's present, and then suddenly distant. It's not dramatic. It's not obvious. But to someone who knows her, it's different, because Alexis wasn't typically someone who faded into the background. She was the one who filled space. Now, she's pulling back from it. And that shift, it doesn't fully make sense yet, until the phone starts ringing. A blocked number. At first, it might seem like nothing. Spam calls happen. Wrong numbers happen. But this isn't occasional. It's repeated. Again, and again, and again, to the point where it becomes disruptive, noticeable, uncomfortable. Alexis shows her mother. The number is already blocked. It shouldn't be getting through. But it is, and that detail matters, because it removes the idea of coincidence. This isn't random timing. It feels targeted, persistent, like someone is trying to reach her and not taking no for an answer. Her mother asks the obvious question, who is it? And once again, Alexis gives the same answer she's been giving. The devil. Now, at that moment, It doesn't come with an explanation. No name, no clear identity, no details that make it easy to understand. Just that word and the feeling behind it, because it's not said casually. It's not said jokingly. It's said with weight, and you can tell she means it. As the night goes on, the emotional pressure starts to surface. Alexis cries, more than once, and this is where the moment shifts from concerning to something deeper, because crying on its own isn't unusual. People cry when they're overwhelmed, when they're stressed, when they're processing something. But this feels different. There's a sense that something is weighing on her, something she isn't fully explaining, something she might not even fully understand herself. And then she says something that stays with her family long after she's gone, something they replay, something they wish they could go back and respond differently. She says she doesn't think she's going to make it to her 30th birthday. It's a quiet statement, but it lands heavy because her birthday isn't far away, just weeks. And this isn't the way someone like Alexis normally talks. She was the type to plan her birthdays in advance. Outfits, celebrations, details mapped out. But this time, there's no excitement, no planning, just that statement and the emotion behind it. Now, in real time, moments like that can be hard to interpret. Do you take it literally? Do you assume it's fear talking? Do you press for more answers? Or do you hope it passes? That's the reality families often face. Because when something feels off, but not fully clear, you're left trying to decide how serious it is. And sometimes, you don't realize the weight of a moment until it's already passed. Looking back now, that weekend stands out as more than just a visit. It becomes a window, a snapshot of Alexis in transition, emotionally, mentally, and possibly situationally. She wasn't at ease. She wasn't settled. She was carrying something, fear, pressure, uncertainty. And even though she was physically surrounded by family, there was a part of what she was going through that remained just out of reach, unspoken, or only partially understood. And that's what makes this moment so important in the timeline, because it's the last time her family saw her in a space that should have felt completely safe. And even there, something didn't feel right. Something was already building. And whatever it was, it didn't stay contained that weekend. It followed her right into the final hours before she disappeared. January 30th. By the time this day begins, Alexis Disha Wear's already carried the weight of the previous weekend with her. The fear, the exhaustion, the tension no one could fully explain. But on the surface, the day starts quietly. Around noon, she leaves her mother's home. No dramatic goodbye. No sign that this would be the last time they would see her. She tells her mother she's heading back to Greenville to rest. And that makes sense, because the version of Alexis they saw that weekend wasn't fully herself. She was tired, drained, emotionally stretched thin. So going home to reset, that feels normal, expected. There's no reason, in that moment, to believe anything is about to go wrong. Hours pass. Then around 3 p.m., they connect again. A video call. And this detail is important, because it gives us the last clear, confirmed image of Alexis alive. She's in bed, lying down, calm, not panicking, not frantic, not visibly distressed. If anything, she looks like someone who is finally taking a moment to breathe. And that's what makes what happens next so difficult to process. Because somewhere between that moment and the next sequence of events, something changes. Again, but this time, faster, more intense, more urgent. Later that day, Alexis reports seeing the same black truck, the one she had been talking about for weeks, the one she believed was following her. At this point, it's no longer just something she's mentioning in conversation. It's something she reacts to. She contacts law enforcement. Officers respond to the area. They check, look around, assess the situation. And from their perspective, there's nothing immediately visible that confirms a threat. No confrontation. No suspect identified. No incident unfolding in real time. So eventually, they leave. And that moment is where everything shifts. Because whatever sense of safety that police presence created, disappears the second they're gone. And Alexis feels it. Immediately, this is where her behavior stops being passive and becomes decisive. She doesn't wait. She doesn't hesitate. She doesn't sit and think it through. She acts fast. She gathers her children, moves quickly, get them into the car, and leaves, not casually, not uncertainly, but with urgency and speed. Now pause here, because this moment matters more than it might seem. This isn't someone making a calm, planned decision. This is someone responding to a perceived threat, a perceived loss of safety. And whether that threat was visible to others or not, to Alexis, it was real enough to trigger action. That's the key, because behavior like this doesn't come from nowhere. It connects directly to everything we've already seen. The fear she expressed, the repeated mention of being followed, the emotional state from the weekend, the belief that something wasn't right. All of that builds into this moment. Staying no longer feels like an option, so she leaves. But here's where the situation becomes even more complex. She doesn't have a clear plan. She's low on gas. She doesn't have cash on her. She has 2 children with her, which means this is a controlled exit. It's a reactive one. She's moving away from something, more than she's moving toward something. And that distinction matters, because when someone is acting reactively, their decisions are shaped by urgency, not strategy. So the question becomes, what did she think she was escaping from? And why did it feel immediate enough to leave like that? Because from the outside, it might look sudden, but from Alexis's perspective, this moment had been building, and once it tipped, there was no going back to normal, only forward, fast, into whatever came next. And tragically, that decision to move, that instinct to act, would lead directly into a final confirmed sequence of her life, a chain of events that started with fear and ended with disappearance. By the time Alexis Disha Wear reaches this point in the day, everything is being driven by urgency. She has already left her apartment in a hurry. She has already reacted to something that made her feel unsafe. And now, she's dealing with a practical problem. She's low on fuel. She doesn't have cash on her. And she still has both of her children in the car. That combination matters, because it limits her options. She can't just keep driving aimlessly. She can't ignore the fuel gauge. And she can't risk being stranded, not with her kids. So she makes a decision, not a long-term one, not a strategic one, a necessary one. She reaches out to the father of her son. They arrange to meet at a gas station in Anderson County, a public place, open, visible, active, on the surface. It's a practical solution, a way to get gas, ensure the children are safe, stabilize the situation, and for a brief moment, that's exactly what it looks like. Surveillance cameras capture the entire interaction, and this footage becomes one of the most important pieces of the entire case, because it shows us something critical. There is no visible chaos, no raised voices, no sudden movements, no signs of fear that can be clearly identified from the outside. Instead, everything appears controlled, routine even. She pulls in. He's already there. Fuel is added to her car, around $30 to $35, enough to keep her moving. At the same time, she takes her children out of her vehicle and transfers them into his. And that detail is significant, because in that moment, she's making a decision about their safety. Whatever she was feeling, whatever she believed was happening, she chose not to keep her children with her. She chose to separate from them. And that's not something she did lightly. Based on everything we know about Alexis, that decision alone suggests she believed something was wrong. Something serious enough that she didn't want her children in the car with her anymore. After that, they speak briefly. There's a hug, a normal human moment, no visible tension, no indication from footage that anything is about to escalate. And that's what makes this moment so deceptive. Because if you watch that footage without context, you wouldn't see danger. You would see 2 people handling a situation calmly. And then she leaves. She pulls out of the gas station. He pulls out as well. And for a moment, it appears they are moving in the same direction, possibly toward a familiar location. Something predictable, but within minutes, that pattern breaks. They approach the first red light, a controlled stop, a moment where everything should remain steady. Instead, this is where everything changes. Suddenly, Alexis accelerates. Hard, not gradually, not casually. She pushes forward with intention. Her car moves past his, cuts around, changes direction, and just like that, she's gone. No signal, no explanation, no communication. From that moment forward, there is no direct, confirmed interaction with her. And that's what makes this point in the timeline so critical. Because it's the last time we see her behavior clearly, the last moment where her actions are fully observable. Everything after this has to be reconstructed, and that creates a gap between what we know and what we're trying to understand. Now, the question becomes, why? Why make that sudden move? Why accelerate like that? Why break away so abruptly from what appeared to be a stable moment? There are a few things we can say, without speculation. First, that action was intentional. You don't accidentally accelerate through a red light scenario like that. You don't unintentionally change direction with that level of decisiveness. Second, it was reactive. It fits the pattern we've already seen throughout the day. Quick decisions, urgent movement, a sense that something is driving her behavior in real time. And third, it introduces a possibility that something shifted again. At that moment, something she saw, something she felt, something she believed, because up until that point, she had done something very deliberate. She had ensured her children were safe. And once they were, her behavior changed. That sequence matters, because it suggests that whatever she did next, she did it alone, and possibly on purpose. But toward what, or away from what? That's where the uncertainty begins, because after that red light, there are no more direct answers, only fragments, camera sightings, phone pings, movements that don't fully explain themselves. But all of it leads back to this moment. A gas station, a normal interaction, a brief sense of control, and then a sudden, unexplained break from everything that made sense just minutes before. The last confirmed moment of Alexis Disha, where moving on her own terms, before everything disappears into questions. From this point forward, the story of Alexis Disha, where it changes in a fundamental way. Up until now, we've been watching events unfold in real time. Phone calls, sightings, surveillance footage, moments that can be seen, heard, and confirmed directly. But after that sudden turn at the red light, everything shifts. The case moves from observation to reconstruction, and that difference matters. Because reconstruction relies on fragments, pieces of information that have to be gathered, aligned, and interpreted carefully. Not everything connects cleanly. Not everything is immediately clear. But investigators begin with what they do have. And one of the first critical pieces is her phone. At some point later that evening, Alexis's phone records a final known ping, a location point, a digital marker showing where the device last connected to a network. And while a phone ping doesn't tell you everything, it tells you enough to start narrowing down movement. It places her within a general area, a direction, a path, but also raises a new layer of uncertainty. Because a phone can only tell you where it was, not necessarily what was happening around it. At the same time, her vehicle begins appearing on traffic cameras, different locations, different points along a route that starts to stretch beyond anything familiar. And this is where the case becomes more complex, because the areas where her car is seen are not places she's known to frequent. No clear personal ties, no obvious destinations, no routine patterns that explain why she would be there. Instead, it looks like movement without a clear endpoint. And that introduces one of the most important questions in the entire investigation. Was Alexis choosing where she was going, or was she reacting to something in real time? Because those are two very different scenarios. If she was choosing, then there's intent, a destination, a plan, even if we don't fully understand it yet. But if she was reacting, then her movement isn't about where she wanted to go. It's about what she was trying to avoid, what she was responding to. And that possibility aligns with everything we've already seen. Her expressed fear, her urgency earlier that day, her sudden change in direction at the red light. But at this stage, there's no definitive answer, only movement, only direction, only the growing realization that something about this path doesn't fit. Then days later, a break in the case, not a resolution, but a discovery. Her car is found, deep in a rural area, far removed from main roads, far removed from populated spaces. The kind of location you don't arrive at by accident. Isolated, quiet, surrounded by dense woods and limited access. When authorities arrive, they assess the scene carefully, and what they find is as important as what they don't. First, there are no signs of mechanical failure. The car didn't break down. There's no indication that it was forced to stop. No obvious reason it would have been abandoned due to a malfunction. Second, there's no immediate evidence of crash. No damage suggesting loss of control. No impact that would explain why the vehicle ended up there. Instead, the car appears to have been driven to that location, intentionally, and then left. Inside the vehicle, everything is still there. Her phone, her purse, her identification, her personal belongings. Nothing appears to be taken. Nothing appears to be disturbed in a way that suggests a hurried exit for practical reasons. And that detail is critical, because when someone voluntarily leaves a situation, they usually take what they need. At the very least, their phone, their money, their identification, essentials, tools for survival. But Alexis didn't take those things. They were left behind, right where they would be expected to be if she never intended to leave them. Then there's one more detail. Outside the vehicle, a single personal item, left behind, on its own, not carefully placed, not stored, just there, and it stands out because it breaks the pattern of everything else. Inside the car, order. Outside, disruption. And that contrast is what leads investigators to a critical early conclusion. This does not appear to be a voluntary disappearance, not in the way those cases typically unfold, because the scene doesn't support it. The location doesn't support it. The belongings left behind don't support it. Instead, it suggests something else, something interrupted, something unexpected, something that caused a separation between Alexis and everything she left behind. Now, at this point in the investigation, there's still more questions and answers. No confirmed timeline beyond the vehicle's movement. No clear indication of who she may have encountered. No direct evidence explaining what happened in that final location. But the direction of the case becomes clearer. This is no longer a situation where someone simply walked away. This is a situation where something went wrong. Somewhere between that red light and this isolated road. And whatever happened in that gap left behind a car, a phone, a life in progress, and no trace of the person at the center of it all. Once the car belonging to Alexis Disha Wear is discovered, the situation escalates immediately. Up until that point, there's still a small space for uncertainty, a possibility, however slim, that she might surface, that there's an explanation waiting just out of reach. But the moment her vehicle is found abandoned in a remote, unfamiliar area, that uncertainty narrows, and the response becomes urgent. A large-scale search begins. Not just a single department, not just a routine check of the surrounding area. This becomes a coordinated effort involving multiple agencies, local law enforcement, state-level resources, specialized teams. K-9 units are brought in, dogs trained to track scent, to detect even the faintest trace of human presence. Air support is deployed, helicopters scanning from above, covering terrain that would take hours, sometimes days, to search on foot. Ground teams move through the area methodically, step by step, grid by grid, covering hundreds of acres, dense woods, uneven terrain, areas that are difficult to access even under normal conditions. And through all of it, they're looking for anything: a footprint, a piece of clothing, a disturbed patch of ground, any sign that might indicate where Alexis went after leaving that vehicle. But nothing turns up. No trail to follow, no direction to pursue, no evidence pointing toward movement, either away from the car or deeper into the surrounding area. And that absence is its own kind of signal, because in most search operations, especially ones involving this level of manpower and resources. Something is usually found, even if it's small, even if it's incomplete, a partial lead, a clue that gives investigators something to build on. But here, there's nothing, not even a starting point. It's as if the trail ends at the car, as if whatever happened to Alexis happened in a way that left no clear trace behind. And that's what makes this stage of the case so difficult, because when there's no evidence, there's no direction. And when there's no direction, every possibility stays open. At the same time, another challenge begins to take shape, one that doesn't involve search teams or physical evidence, but communication, or rather, the lack of it. As the investigation continues, certain details are not shared with the public, and more importantly, not fully shared with the family. Now, from an investigative standpoint, this is standard procedure. Law enforcement often withholds information to protect the integrity of the case, prevent false confessions, ensure that only credible leads move forward. In many cases, that approach is necessary. It helps preserve the possibility of future breakthroughs. But for families, it creates a different kind of burden. Because while investigators are working with information behind the scenes, the people closest to Alexis are left waiting, with limited updates, limited explanations, limited clarity about what is actually happening. And that creates a gap between two realities. On one side, what is known, details that exist within the investigation, findings that may not yet be ready or appropriate to release. On the other side, what is shared, brief updates, general statements, carefully controlled information. And in between those two, the family, trying to make sense of something they can't fully see, trying to understand progress without being able to measure it, trying to hold on to hope while navigating uncertainty. Because silence in situations like this doesn't feel neutral. It feels heavy. Every day without new information starts to carry weight. Every unanswered question grows louder. Every moment without resolution stretches longer than the last. And over time, that silence becomes part of the story itself. Not just the absence of Alexis, but the absence of answers. Because by this point, two things are happening at once. The search for Alexis is ongoing, and the distance between what is known and what is understood is growing. And that combination, an active search with no visible results, and limited information about what comes next, creates one of the most difficult phases in any case like this. A phase defined not by movement, but by stillness, not by discovery, but by waiting. And for the family of Alexis Disha Wear, that waiting will become one of the hardest parts of all. As time moves forward, the story of Alexis Disha Wear changes again, not in the way most people expect. There's no sudden breakthrough, no arrest, no clear explanation, just time and the slow, quiet weight of it. Days turn into months, months turn into years, and with each passing year, the absence becomes harder to carry. Because in cases like this, time doesn't heal in the traditional sense. It stretches the question, makes it louder, more permanent. For Alexis's children, that impact is deeply personal. Her daughter, Naomi, old enough to remember, old enough to know who her mother was, old enough to feel the absence in real, tangible ways. She doesn't just miss her mother. She lives with the questions. Where is she? What happened to her? Why didn't she come back? And as she grows older, those questions don't fade. They evolve. They become more complex, harder to answer, harder to carry. Because children don't just grieve what they've lost. They grow into the understanding of it. They begin to realize what moments are missing. Birthdays, milestones, everyday conversations, things that should have been shared, things that now exist only in memory. And in some cases, even those memories begin to blur with time. For her son, Trey Val, the impact is different, but no less significant. He was too young to fully understand what was happening when his mother disappeared. Too young to form lasting memories in the way older children do. So for him, the loss isn't tied to specific moments. It's tied to absence itself. He grows up asking questions not from memory, but from what he's been told, trying to piece together who his mother was through stories, photos, and the voices of others. And that creates a different kind of gap, not just missing someone, but trying to understand someone you barely had the chance to know. Then there's Alexis's mother, the one who saw her that final weekend, the one who heard the fear in her voice, the one who now carries the responsibility of raising her grandchildren. For her, the loss operates on multiple levels. She didn't just lose a daughter. She became the bridge between past and future, the one responsible for keeping Alexis's memory alive, for answering questions she doesn't have answers to, for providing stability in the middle of uncertainty. And that responsibility doesn't come with closure. It comes with endurance. Because what she carries isn't just grief. Grief, in its traditional form, has a direction. It moves through stages. It leads, eventually, to a form of acceptance. But uncertainty is different. It doesn't move. It stays. It lingers in every unanswered question, in every possibility that hasn't been ruled out, in every moment where the phone could ring, but doesn't. And that's what makes this case so heavy. Because closure, even when it's painful, still provides something solid, a truth you can face, a reality you can begin to process. But this is something else entirely. This is waking up every day without knowing. This is holding on to hope, while also preparing for the worst. This is living in the space between possibilities, where nothing is confirmed and nothing is resolved. And that kind of uncertainty doesn't just affect individuals. It spreads through the family, through the community, through everyone who has followed the case and is still waiting for answers. Because the question doesn't go away. It doesn't settle. It doesn't fade into the background. It stays present, persistent, unfinished. And for the family of Alexis Disha Wear, that question has become part of their daily reality. Not just what happened, but why they still don't know. So what really happened to Alexis Disha Wear? By this point, we've walked through every confirmed moment, every documented step, every decision she made that day. And when you lay it all out, a pattern begins to form. Not a complete picture, but a structure, something you can trace, even if you can't fully explain it. Because there are things in this case we do know. We know she felt like she was being followed, not casually, not once, but consistently enough that she told her family more than once that something wasn't right. We know she was in the middle of change, not just thinking about it, actively moving toward it, preparing to leave a situation, planning a relocation, building a new life for herself and her children. We know that on the day she disappeared, her behavior shifted into urgency. She didn't move slowly. She didn't wait things out. She reacted. She left her apartment quickly. She made decisions under pressure. She adjusted in real time. We know she made a critical choice at the gas station to ensure her children were safe, to separate them from whatever situation she believed she was in. And we know that within minutes of that moment, something changed again. At that red light, she didn't continue forward. She broke away, accelerated, changed direction, and disappeared. We know her car was later found in a place that doesn't connect to her known life. No family ties, no business ties, no clear reason for her to be there. And inside that car, everything was left behind. Her phone, her belongings, her identity, everything that keeps a person connected to the world. Still there, waiting, but she wasn't. And when you take all of those facts together, they lead you to one unavoidable truth. Something happened, not somewhere far removed from the timeline, not days later, but within a very specific window, a narrow stretch of time that begins the moment she drives away from that gas station and ends where a car is found. That space, that gap, is where all the answers are, because before that moment, we can see her, we can track her, we can understand her decisions. After that moment, we're left with absence and questions. What caused her to change direction so suddenly? Was she trying to get away from something? Or was she heading towards something she believed would help her? Did she encounter someone? Was she followed? Did something happen inside the car or after she stepped out of it? These aren't just theories. They're the natural questions that come from the facts we do have. But here's the part that stays with you. the part that doesn't fade, the part that makes this case different from others. Because for all the uncertainty, there's one thing that feels certain. Someone knows. Someone knows what happened in that gap. Someone knows how a woman who was actively building her life, who was raising her children, who had plans, direction, and momentum, vanished without a trace. And that's what makes this case feel unfinished. Because it isn't just about what happened to Alexis Disha Wear. It's about the silence that followed, the silence that has lasted years, the silence that continues, even now. But cases like this, they don't stay silent forever, because all it takes is one piece of information, one detail, one person deciding to speak, and everything changes. So the question isn't just what happened. The question is, when will the truth finally catch up to it? When a case like this is told, it's easy for the focus to stay on timelines, movements, unanswered questions. But the truth is, the real story doesn't end where the trail goes cold. It continues in the lives of the people left behind. And for the family of Alexis Disha Wear, that impact is something they live with every single day. Not in headlines, not in updates, but in the quiet moments most people don't see. For Alexis's mother, the loss is layered. She doesn't just carry grief. She carries memories. She remembers that final weekend, the conversations, the tone in her daughter's voice, the moments that felt off, but didn't yet have meaning. And like many parents in situations like this, there's a weight that comes with hindsight, replaying moments, questioning decisions, wondering if something could have been done differently. But what makes her burden even heavier is that she never got an ending, no confirmation, no goodbye, no clarity, just a question that never resolves. And on top of that, she became responsible for raising Alexis's children, stepping into a role she never expected to take on again, not out of choice, but out of necessity. She became their stability, their protection, their connection to the mother they lost. And she does it while still searching, still hoping, still carrying the same unanswered questions they will one day ask her. Alexis's daughter, Naomi, was old enough to remember her mother, and that makes the loss both clearer and more painful, because she doesn't just feel absence, she remembers presence. She remembers what it was like to have her mother there, the way she dressed her, the way she spoke to her, the way she showed up in her life. And now, she's growing up without that, without answers, without closure, at an age where identity begins to form, where understanding the world becomes more complex. She's also trying to understand something most people never have to face. What happened to my mother? And that question doesn't stay still. It evolves. As she gets older, it becomes harder, more detailed, more real. And in some cases, children in her position don't just deal with internal questions. They face it externally too. Peers asking, people talking, moments where something deeply personal becomes something others don't fully understand. And that can be isolating, because while the world moves on, she can't, not without answers. For her son, Trayval, the experience is different, but no less significant. He was too young to fully remember his mother when she disappeared. So instead of memories, he grows up with stories, photos, fragments of who she was, told through the voices of others. And that creates a different kind of absence. Because it's not just about missing someone you remember, it's about trying to understand someone you never truly got to know. He'll grow up asking questions like, what was she like? What did she love? How did she laugh? And those answers will come secondhand, passed down, reconstructed, but never experience it directly. And that kind of loss, it shapes a person, quietly, over time. For the entire family, life has become a balance between two difficult realities, holding on to hope and preparing for the possibility that answers may never come. Because in cases like this, there's no clear path forward, no timeline for resolution, no guarantee that the truth will surface, just time and waiting and continuing to speak her name, to keep her story alive, to make sure she isn't reduced to just another unsolved case. Because to them, she isn't a case. She's a daughter, a mother, a sister, a life that was interrupted. And that's why stories like this matter. Not for speculation, not for entertainment, but for awareness. Because somewhere out there, someone knows something. And the more people who hear her story, the harder it becomes for the truth to stay hidden. If you made it this far, take a moment to reflect on everything you've heard. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, stories that center the victims, the families, and the truth, then make sure you subscribe. Because there are more cases like this, more stories that need attention, more voices that deserve to be heard. And sometimes, all it takes is one person paying attention for everything to change.